With midterm elections just around the corner in November, some are wondering if Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders can help progressives win seats. Our Revolution, a political organization formed after Sanders' presidential run, is backing candidates in the elections. And so far, 20 have won in congressional and gubernatorial primaries, 27 have lost. Politico's David Siders recently wrote an article called "Bernie and His Army Are Losing 2018." It looks at how the Sanders movement is faring this election season and the impact it may have on 2020. David joins us now to discuss this. So, David, no one would expect every Sanders-backed candidate to win. Several actually have, but given that these are some high-profile losses, what does it indicate about the Sanders movement?
It's interesting. I think the high-profile losses are telling because these are races run in districts with a lot of attention paid to them, or in some cases statewide, like we saw in Michigan the other day. The whole thing about Bernie Sanders coming out of 2016, though, and this is probably fair to point out to Sanders supporters, is that his whole push was that he was an ideas person, right? And this was going to move the party to the left. And I think it's undeniable that Sanders' candidacy had an effect on bringing things like, a more liberal healthcare conversation into the Democratic mainstream. But when it comes to these major, the marquee races, Bernie Sanders is, his influence is having the same effect that it did in 16, which was it's very interesting and it generates a lot of energy, but ultimately he's failed at the ballot box, or his candidates have.
Why do you think he gets so much attention then? Because I spoke with the Democratic strategist yesterday about this, and they dismissed the idea that the Sanders movement is sputtering. In fact, he argued it's providing energy for Democrats. How do you see it?
I think I think it's true that progressives and Bernie Sanders should be credited with bringing a lot of young people into the party, a lot of young people registering to vote, more small dollar donations than we've seen before. But I think it's wrong to think that Bernie Sanders and the progressive wing of the party are the only sources of energy in the Democratic Party right now. I'm not even sure they're the most important source of energy. I mean, you see women becoming more and more engaged this election cycle, particularly African American women, and there's a resurgence, I think, of moderate Democrats talking about how do we take on Donald Trump. So I do think that the Bernie Sanders wing and the progressive wing of the party is energized and has provided energy, but it's not the only source of energy in the Democratic Party right now.
Now, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez won her primary in New York State. She wasn't backed by Sanders, but is considered a kind of protege of his. How much attention and weight should we give that type of victory when discussing the Sanders factor in the upcoming midterms?
First of all, that candidate is amazing. And you see her walk into a room, Democrats line up to see this person. They were lining up in California to see her speak. And that's a country away. In a nation where most people can't identify Congress members from their own states, she is an instant sensation. And I think deserves credit for that and does bring a lot of energy to the party. But let's keep in mind that her district that's a very Democratic congressional district. And this is one of the criticisms, I think, of the progressive left, which is that the victories they've had have tended to be in very liberal parts of the country and in very liberal districts. And so there is still a question about whether that can play or be successful in states that will matter in 2020, like Wisconsin and Minnesota, Michigan, Pennsylvania. And I think the jury's out.
And so where does that leave Bernie Sanders in all of this? Does he need to just motivate people to get out and run on their own? Or is there still a sense that he may run again in 2020?
Well, there is a sense. He's talked to advisors about it, and I think he's considering it. I think two things are true. First of all, it's true that Bernie Sanders had an effect in 2016 and an effect on the party, and he can already claim some victories for moving the party to the left. I also think these defeats that he's had point to some problems with organization and just winning that Bernie Sanders had in 16. Now, that all being said, I don't believe that in December or January of this year after the midterms, anybody is going to be looking back at a scorecard of Bernie Sanders endorsements. This is interesting right now, but I think in January and February, for anybody running for 2020, including Sanders, it's going to be all about, what are you doing for me now, and where is your candidacy going? Nobody's going to think about who did you endorse in the Michigan gubernatorial race.
Right. We'll see what happens next. David Siders, thanks very much for your time today.
Thank you.